$4.4 billion. That is the exact amount the Central Intelligence Agency spent on intelligence operations in Iraq between 2003 and 2006. $4.4 billion. With a B. That budget bought them Predator drones circling 24 hours a day at 60,000 feet. It bought them the most advanced signals intercept architecture ever deployed in a war zone, capable of monitoring 14 million phone calls simultaneously. It bought them a constellation of KH-11 keyhole reconnaissance satellites, each one a 17-ton telescope hurtling through low Earth orbit, powerful enough to read the serial number on a rifle from space. It bought them encrypted communication systems at $45,000 per unit, facial recognition software, ground-penetrating radar, and a network of over 200 paid informants, most of whom were Iraqi exiles living in hotel suites in Amman, Jordan, who had not set foot in Iraq in over a decade. And across the hall, in a cramped, poorly lit office inside the British Embassy compound in Baghdad, sat a team of 11 MI6 officers. Their total annual budget for the entire Middle East and North Africa region was approximately £280 million sterling. Not for Iraq, for everything, from Morocco to Iran. Their most expensive piece of equipment was a kettle. If you stacked the CIA's Iraq intelligence budget in $100 bills, the pile would reach higher than a commercial airliner cruises. If you stacked MI6's allocation the same way, it would barely clear the roof of a double-decker bus. The Americans had more satellite analysts assigned to Iraq alone than MI6 had field officers in the entire world. And yet, by the end of 2005, an internal review by the CIA's own Inspector General delivered a verdict so devastating that portions of it remain classified to this day. The conclusion, summarized in one brutal sentence: per officer deployed, British intelligence was producing 4 times the volume of verified, actionable intelligence reports than the Central Intelligence Agency. 4 times. With no satellites, no drones, with 11 people and a kettle. This is the story of how that happened. How a handful of British spies, using methods their American counterparts dismissed as primitive and recklessly dangerous, walked into the most complex intelligence environment since the Cold War and systematically humiliated the CIA on its own battlefield. How they turned tribal warlords into allies with cups of tea, while the Americans failed to buy loyalty with briefcases full of cash. And how, in the end, one of the most senior CIA officers in Iraq stood before his colleagues and admitted that the British had been the only ones who understood what they were doing. The officer, a man we will call Gerald Harmon, because his real identity remains protected, reportedly said, "I was wrong. We were all wrong. We built the most expensive intelligence apparatus in the history of espionage, and they beat us with shoe leather and tea bags." To understand what happened in Iraq, you have to understand the fundamental difference between how Americans and British approach intelligence. That difference goes back centuries. The American model was born after Pearl Harbor. The shock of December 7th, 1941, hardwired a singular obsession into American espionage. Never again be caught off guard. The solution was technological omniscience. If you can see everything, hear everything, intercept everything, nothing can surprise you. This philosophy produced the most formidable signals intelligence apparatus the world has ever seen. The American model is fundamentally about collection. Gather everything, sort later. The British model is almost the opposite. It was forged in centuries of managing an empire with resources that were always insufficient. When Britain controlled a quarter of the Earth's landmass, it did so not with overwhelming force, but with an extraordinarily small number of people who understood the societies they operated in. The British colonial officer spoke the language, understood the tribal structures, knew which sheikh had a blood feud with which other sheikh, and why, and how long it had been going on. The British Empire ran not on data, but on relationships. When that empire collapsed, the philosophy migrated into MI6. So when both agencies arrived in Iraq in 2003, they carried fundamentally different toolkits. The Americans brought technology, the British brought tradecraft, and Iraq would punish one approach and reward the other with surgical cruelty. The CIA activated its Iraqi Operations Group, a unit that had been running exile networks since the First Gulf War. The strategy was straightforward: leverage relationships with Iraqi defectors and combine their intelligence with the most advanced technical capabilities in history. The theory was sound. The execution was catastrophic. The problem was that most of the CIA's Iraqi sources were liars. This is not exaggeration. It is the documented conclusion of multiple post-war investigations. The agency had been paying millions to Iraqi exiles who told them exactly what they wanted to hear. Ahmed Shalabi and his Iraqi National Congress received over $97 million in US government funding. His network produced a steady stream of reports about weapons of mass destruction, active nuclear programs, mobile biological weapons labs. Almost all of it was fabricated. But the problem went deeper. Signals intelligence requires your enemy to use electronic communications. In a country where the insurgency was coordinated through human messengers and face-to-face meetings in tea houses, your billion-dollar intercept architecture picks up nothing. Satellite imagery requires you to know what you are looking for. In a country where the enemy stores weapons in civilian houses indistinguishable from every other house on the block, your surveillance gives you thousands of images of nothing useful. And the CIA's rotation cycle was putting officers in country for 6 months before replacing them with someone new who didn't speak Arabic and was starting every relationship from zero. The CIA was spending billions to be blind, and this is where the British walked in. But first, I need to take you somewhere else entirely. Because to understand why these British officers were capable of what they did, you have to understand what made them. And that story starts not in Iraq, but in the mountains of Wales. The Brecon Beacons. Imagine a range of hills that looks like God designed them specifically to break human beings. In summer, fog so thick you cannot see your boots. In winter, winds that knock a grown man off his feet. The terrain is a nightmare of peat bogs, steep escarpments, and featureless ridgelines. This is where the SAS has conducted its selection course since 1952. While MI6 officers are not SAS soldiers, the operatives in Iraq had completed elements of special forces training and worked hand in glove with SAS teams as part of Task Force Black, the Joint Special Forces unit that operated out of a compound in Baghdad known as the Station. SAS selection is not a fitness test. It is a systematic destruction of everything a human being thinks they know about their own limits. It begins with 4 weeks in the Brecon Beacons. Candidates carry a Bergen rucksack weighing 25 kilograms, not including food, water, or their rifle. They navigate alone, checkpoint to checkpoint, using only a compass and a hand-drawn sketch map. No GPS, no established trails, no support vehicle following behind. No encouragement, no feedback of any kind. The directing staff do not tell you if you are doing well or poorly. They do not tell you how much further you have to go. They do not smile. They do not frown. They simply watch, and they write things down. Each day, the distances increase, and the time limits shrink. By the end of the first week comes the Fan Dance, a 24-kilometre forced march up and over Pen y Fan, the highest peak in southern Britain, with a brutal ascent known as Jacob's Ladder that has ended more military careers than any enemy bullet. The wind at the summit can tear the beret off your head and send it into the next valley. The fog can reduce visibility to 0 in minutes. Candidates stumble through it alone, lungs burning, legs filling with concrete, Bergen straps cutting into shoulders that went numb hours ago. Candidates who survive face 3 more weeks of escalating punishment. Heavier loads, longer distances, night marches through terrain that can kill the careless. One wrong step on a peat bog in the dark, and you are waist deep in freezing black water with 55 pounds on your back and no one coming to pull you out. The phase culminates with the long drag. 64 kilometres across the full breadth of the Brecon Beacons, carrying 55 pounds, to be completed in under 20 hours. It starts around midnight after a full day of marching with little or no sleep. Candidates navigate alone through darkness, across mountains, through bogs, over terrain. The elements have been grinding flat for 10,000 years. Your feet are blistered, your knees are swollen, your shoulders are raw meat under the Bergen straps, and you still have 40 kilometres to go. The long drag is designed to be completed at the precise point where a human body has absolutely nothing left, where every single step is a conscious, deliberate decision to override biology, where the only thing keeping you moving is a quality that cannot be trained, cannot be taught, and cannot be measured on any test. Less than 10% of candidates pass. Some years, the number is lower. Candidates have died on these hills. In 2013, 3 soldiers died of heat exhaustion during the Fan Dance alone. The Brecon Beacons do not care about your ambitions. The men who survived this process showed up in Iraq, not with billion-dollar budgets, but with a particular understanding of what a human being is capable of when everything else is stripped away. Technology is a tool. Willpower is a weapon. This matters because what MI6 did in Iraq was, by conventional standards, insane. The CIA operated from fortified compounds, moving in armored convoys, communicating through encrypted satellite links. Their officers wore body armor and were accompanied by private military contractors. They met sources in safe houses surveilled for days in advance. The British did none of this. MI6 officers routinely walked the streets of Baghdad, Basra, and Mosul in actual local clothing. Dish-dasher robes, sandals bought at market stalls. They grew beards. They learned not just Arabic, but the specific regional dialect, because in Iraq, the difference between a Baghdadi accent and a Basrawi accent is the difference between trust and suspicion. They went to tea houses regularly. They sat with merchants, taxi drivers, farmers. They did not offer money. They did not flash photographs of wanted men. They did not arrive with a translator and a list of questions. They drank tea. They asked about families. They talked about crops, weather, the price of fuel. They complained about the heat. They complimented the tea. They remembered names. They remembered the details people told them the previous week. The sick daughter, the broken truck, the cousin's wedding. They listened with the kind of attention that makes another person feel, perhaps for the first time in a war zone, that someone genuinely cares what they have to say. And over weeks and months, those conversations built something that no amount of money or technology can manufacture. Trust. This was not recklessness, it was doctrine. A deliberate strategy based on a principle refined over decades. In a tribal society, Information flows through relationships, not technology. The man who knows where the weapon's cache is hidden will never tell a stranger in body armor offering $50,000. But he might tell the man who sat with him every week for 3 months, who knows his children's names, who brought him tea, who treated him like a human being rather than a transaction. Not because he was bribed, not because he was threatened, because in his culture, to share knowledge with a trusted friend is as natural as breathing. The Americans could not understand this. The declassified records show they actively tried to stop it. In early 2004, a CIA station chief sent a cable to Langley calling British methods unacceptably reckless. A Pentagon assessment recommended restricting British intelligence to coalition bases, noting their methods were inconsistent with force protection protocols. The British ignored both, and then the intelligence started flowing. Let me give you a specific example. In the spring of 2004, both agencies were trying to map the insurgent network in Anbar province. The key was the tribal structure. Whichever service gained the cooperation of tribal sheikhs would access a network of informants no technology could replicate. The tribes knew everything: who planted the roadside bombs, where weapons were stored, which mosques were meeting points. The CIA identified a sheikh near Ramadi and arranged a meeting. A CIA officer presented him with $50,000 in cash and asked for information about insurgent activity. The sheikh took the money, smiled, and provided names of several dangerous insurgent commanders. Every name was false. The sheikh had given them the names of rivals from a competing tribe. The Americans raided the wrong houses, detained the wrong people, enraged the wrong families, and created exactly the resentment that fueled the insurgency. The money disappeared into the sheikh's accounts. He had used the CIA as a weapon against his enemies. When the deception was uncovered, the agency had burned their credibility with every tribal leader who heard about it. And in Iraq, everyone hears. The British approach was different in every conceivable way. An MI6 officer identified a different sheikh in the same province. Instead of approaching with money, the officer spent 3 weeks simply being present. He visited the local market. He drank tea in shops near the sheikh's compound. He was seen. He made no demands, offered no bribes. He existed in the sheikh's peripheral vision. After 3 weeks, curiosity overcame suspicion, and the sheikh invited the British officer for tea. The officer arrived alone, unarmed, carrying a tin of English tea, not $50,000, a tin of tea. They drank together. The officer asked about the sheikh's family, the harvest. He spoke Arabic with enough fluency to be respectful, but enough imperfection to be endearing. He did not mention the insurgency. He did not ask for intelligence. He drank his tea, thanked his host, and left. He came back the following week, and the week after that. By the 6th visit, the sheikh was volunteering information, not because he was being paid, because he trusted this strange British man who respected the rituals, never rushed, never demanded. The sheikh began telling the MI6 officer things he would never have told an American: which families had sons in the insurgency, which roads smuggled weapons from Syria, which former officers organized the resistance. The intelligence was specific, current, and devastatingly accurate. Within 2 months, that single relationship produced 11 verified intelligence sources, branching through cousins, business partners, and allied tribal leaders. The CIA, operating with 200 times the budget in the same province during the same period, had managed 2 reliable sources. Both were compromised within weeks. The failure was not individual. Many CIA officers were brilliant, dedicated, and brave. The failure was systemic. The CIA had built a machine for a different war, a clean technological war against a state adversary with communications to intercept and installations to photograph. Iraq was a war of whispers, of alliances forged over tea, of information flowing through networks of trust that had existed for generations. Nowhere was this more apparent than in Basra, the heart of the British zone. MI6 ran operations from a nondescript compound most locals called the British House. No sign, no flag, no visible security. To the casual observer, it looked like any other residence in the neighborhood, which was precisely the point. Inside, a team of MI6 officers and their SAS liaison partners were conducting what one former officer later described as intelligence the way it was meant to be done. They had divided the city into sectors, and each sector had an assigned officer responsible for building a relationship map, not with satellites or data analysis, but with footwork. They walked their sectors every day. They catalogued every tea house, mechanic's shop, barber, and mosque. They noted which streets were busy at which hours, which shops closed early, which cars appeared in which neighborhoods at unusual times. They learned the rhythms of Basra the way a musician learns a piece of music, not by analyzing it from a distance, but by being inside it, by feeling it pulse. They kept handwritten notebooks, not encrypted digital files transmitted via satellite to a server farm in Virginia. Handwritten notebooks. They recorded conversations, observations, patterns. Who was talking to whom? Which houses had new visitors? Which men looked nervous? They cross-referenced observations the old-fashioned way, sitting around a table with cups of tea, comparing notes, arguing about interpretations, building a picture piece by piece like a jigsaw puzzle where the box has no picture on it. They recruited agents not with money, but by identifying individuals who had deeper reasons to cooperate. A father whose son was killed by insurgents. A teacher disgusted by the violence swallowing his city. A shopkeeper who wanted his neighborhood safe for his grandchildren. These people were not mercenaries selling information to the highest bidder. They were members of a community who had been given a reason to trust one particular British officer and who believed that sharing what they knew might help stop the bloodshed. By mid-2005, MI6's Basra network was producing intelligence at a rate that stunned British military command. They had mapped militia leadership structures, identified weapons supply chains from Iran, and pinpointed safe houses and bomb factories. Fewer than 20 people. There was a moment that crystallized the dynamic. During a joint briefing in the Green Zone, the American presentation was a technological spectacle. Satellite imagery in three-dimensional models, signals analysis on screens costing more than most houses, spinning interactive maps. 90 minutes. At the end, the senior general asked, "Where is number 3 on the target list right now?" Silence. The CIA could tell you where his phone last pinged a tower. They could show his car from space. They could play a phone call from 3 days ago. They could not tell you where he was sitting right now. The British briefing lasted 11 minutes. An MI6 officer stood with a single sheet of paper. Target number 7 is at his cousin's house in the Zubair district. He arrived at 10:15 this morning. He is meeting 2 men from Jaish al-Mahdi. One carries a bag our source believes contains payment for a weapons delivery from Iran. We have a 4-man SAS team 300 meters from the house. They can move on your order. The room went quiet. The Americans could see everything and know nothing. The British could see almost nothing and know everything that mattered. The same philosophy manifested in tactical operations. When Task Force Black conducted raids based on MI6 intelligence, the precision bewildered American counterparts. Delta Force would plan a strike with drone surveillance, satellite imagery, armored convoys, helicopter support, and operational plans running dozens of pages. Preparation for a single raid could take days. Task Force Black operated differently. An MI6 officer got intelligence from a human source. A second source verified it within hours. A 4-man SAS team would drive to the target in nondescript vehicles, approach on foot, breach, clear, extract. From intelligence received to operation complete, sometimes hours, sometimes minutes. In one legendary operation, a 4-man SAS team cleared a compound in Baghdad's Dora district in 17 seconds. 5 armed insurgents neutralized, a senior bomb maker captured, a laptop recovered containing the communications network for a cell responsible for over 30 car bombings. 37 rounds fired between them. In the review, an American Delta Force officer reportedly said, "We would have used 37,000 rounds and an airstrike." He was joking. Mostly. Now, the moment when everything came to a head. In autumn 2005, MI6 received intelligence about a high-value target we will call the Engineer, a senior figure responsible for designing and distributing the improvised explosive devices, killing coalition soldiers and civilians at an appalling rate. Number 4 on the most wanted list. The CIA had been hunting him for over a year. Millions spent, predator drones deployed, thousands of phone calls intercepted, satellite imagery analyzed. Nothing, no location, no confirmed sighting. MI6 found him in 11 days. One MI6 officer had been cultivating a source in the engineer's extended family for 4 months. The source was a mechanic who owned a small garage on a dusty back street in a neighborhood the Americans had never walked through. He had lost his brother to an IED explosion 3 months earlier, the same kind of device the engineer designed. Every week, the British officer visited the garage, drank tea, talked about engines, about the difficulty of getting spare parts, about the mechanic's children who were growing up in a city that smelled like burning rubber and cordite. He never asked about the insurgency, not once in 4 months. Then, gradually, carefully, over multiple conversations, the officer began to steer the conversation toward the violence. Not toward intelligence targets, toward the violence itself, the mechanic's brother, the funerals he had attended, the wives who were now widows, the children who no longer played in the street. And when the moment was right, when the trust was deep enough, the officer mentioned the engineer, not as a target, as the man responsible for the deaths, including the mechanic's brother. The source did not stiffen. He did not demand money. He did not become suspicious. He sat quietly for a long moment, looking at his hands. Then he told the officer what he knew, where the engineer was staying, with whose family, in which house, on which street, in which room, because he trusted this man, because he wanted the killing to stop, because after 4 months of shared tea and quiet conversation, helping this British officer felt less like betrayal and more like justice. The source provided an address, not a general area, not a neighborhood, an address, a house the CIA's satellites had photographed 10,000 times without identifying because it looked exactly like every other house on the street. Within 24 hours, a 12-man SAS team hit the building at 3 in the morning. The engineer was captured alive with 2 associates and documents that led to disrupting 7 IED cells across central Iraq. 0 casualties, 0 shots fired. The most dangerous bomb maker in Iraq was in custody because a British spy spent 4 months drinking tea in a mechanic's shop. Then came the reckoning. In early 2006, a closed briefing at CIA headquarters in Langley. The audience included senior CIA officials, Pentagon liaisons, and National Security Council representatives. The British performance was the primary agenda item because it had produced results that made the agency's own efforts look, in the words of one attendee, professionally humiliating. Gerald Harman stood before his colleagues and delivered what multiple sources describe as the most painful internal admission in the CIA's post-September 11th history. He acknowledged British superiority by every measurable metric. He acknowledged that reliance on technology and exile networks had been a strategic failure. He acknowledged that the British approach had proven superior. And then the words that would echo through Langley. I was wrong about them. We were wrong. We spent $4.4 billion and they beat us with patience and teacups. They were the only ones over there who understood what the hell they were doing. A second officer, Marcus Dunlap, who had served as the CIA's liaison with British forces, described MI6 officers and SAS teams as a completely different species. Not better trained, not more courageous, fundamentally different in their understanding of intelligence work. Dunlap said the CIA had been fighting an information war. The British had been fighting a relationship war. And in a tribal society, relationships are information. The sheikh who trusts you does not give intelligence as a transaction. He shares knowledge as an extension of the relationship. The intelligence is not the product. The relationship is the product. Intelligence is what flows from it naturally, like water downhill. The Pentagon was forced to revisit its own recommendations. The institution that had recommended restricting British intelligence to coalition bases now had to acknowledge those dangerous methods had produced the war's most significant intelligence successes. A revised assessment quietly recommended studying British methods for integration into American doctrine. So what is the lesson? It would be easy to tell a simple story of the underdog beating the giant, and there is an element of that. But the real lesson cuts deeper. Technology gives you data. Relationships give you understanding. In a complex human environment, a counterinsurgency, a tribal society riven by ancient feuds, data without understanding is not just useless, it is dangerous. It leads you to bomb the wrong house, pay the wrong sheikh, create the very enemies you are trying to destroy. The CIA's satellites worked perfectly, but no satellite tells you why a man plants a bomb. No intercept reveals which sheikh is lying. No database captures the texture of a relationship built over months of shared tea. The information that matters most in a human conflict can only be obtained by being human, by being present, by being patient, by being real. The British understood this because their history forced them to. When you have £280 million against $4.4 billion, you cannot compete on technology. You find a different way. And the different way is the oldest way. One human being earning the trust of another. It requires courage that has nothing to do with physical bravery. The courage to be vulnerable, to walk into a hostile environment without armor, to sit with a stranger and make yourself known, to invest months in a relationship that might produce nothing, to believe a cup of tea is worth more than a briefcase full of money. The men who did this in Iraq were not superhuman. They were professionals trained in a particular tradition, tested in the mountains of Wales, and sent into the most dangerous country on earth with almost nothing except competence and an old philosophy about understanding the world. And they won. Not because they were braver than the Americans, not because they were smarter, but because they understood something $4.4 billion could not buy. That the most powerful intelligence tool ever created is not a satellite at 60,000 feet, not a drone in the stratosphere, not a supercomputer processing 14 million phone calls. It is a human being sitting across from another human being, drinking tea and listening. The faint-hearted build satellites. The brave drink tea. And the wars that matter are won not by those who see everything from orbit, but by those who understand everything from ground level. By the men willing to put down encrypted radios and pick up a teacup. Who know the most dangerous weapon in the world is not a Predator missile. It is trust. And trust cannot be bought for $50,000. It cannot be manufactured by a contractor. It cannot be launched into orbit. It can only be earned, one cup at a time.